everybody, Invisiblekatana here with my review for The Walking Dead. This is backwards. Compendium 2. It's sort of a review slash discussion, as you can see, and as you heard of the giant sound. I honestly didn't think it would sound that loud. But a ridiculous book. So I'm doing this series for the return of Free Comic Book Day, which of course is August 14th, next Saturday. So I wanted to go through. My plan was originally to have more reviews this weekend, but it took me forever to do this. It's just been busy. So went through the first one. If you guys want to check that out, it was a very long video. I'll try to keep this one a bit more succinct, but it is definitely a pseudo review, more of a discussion of just how crazy the story gets in part 2 of the Compendium series, I guess, if you want to call it that. So I really enjoy this. This takes us from the end of the prison, so like right after the prison, all the way up to some other stuff. So of course I'll get into that from spoilers, but there will be spoilers in this naturally because it's about all this. So this is issues, let's see, 49 to 96. So all of that is in here. Highly recommend it. You can probably get it for super cheap at this point on Amazon, of course. But I really enjoyed it. I got my notes here, so we're gonna shoot through it. Simply put, just because we're mostly gonna do spoilers for this. So if you have not read this one yet, even if you've seen the show, if you're caught up on the entire series, you should read this. It's very different. Different characters exist. Different characters live. Different characters die. Some characters die the way other characters did. So things get rolled around in the TV show compared to the actual comic book. So it's really cool. So I would highly recommend picking this up as well as the first one. You can pick up literally the whole series. Compendiums 1 through 4. That's the entire series of The Walking Dead. So you can just pick up the whole thing now and shoot through it. Sort of. I mean, you see that you're not really shooting through it, but you go through it, if you will. So kicking things off. This book, first note I have here, Carl becomes a character. So in the first compendium, Carl was obviously there. He was the son of like the main character. That's been the whole thing. But until he loses his mom, he's still kind of the kid. He's still the kid in the background. Like they have those moments. Of course, he kills another child, but he just has moments here and there. And obviously, also he killed Shane like really early on. But he has moments here and there. Where it's like, these are important moments for Carl's character. But this book is where we get to see that actually play out. Like the stuff that he did by killing Shane, killing Ben, losing both his mom and his sister, all in that insane moment. Losing a lot of people, really, because just going through the, running from the prison, they lost a buttload of people during that moment in the series. So the way that they handled that was really interesting. And so Carl eventually starts to become a real character. He has to deal with the moment of thinking that he's about to lose his dad because Rick ends up getting sick. So we have the calls beginning for Rick where he starts hearing Lori. I thought that was pretty cool. I did write a note that she mentions Carl by name. It was like, I just want to make sure that I want to make sure that you and Carl are safe. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. If you're not paying attention to it, it's kind of just like, okay, it's like you might fly through, but you also might notice, like, did he ever reference Carl by name? Like, he always says my son, but then she said Carl. And it's just one of those things, like, you read it, it's like, yeah, I know who Carl is. So you hear it so many times when someone random says it, it's just like, okay, yeah, they know who Carl is. But it's like, no, that was him. That was kind of the hint that he was snapping. And so I thought that was pretty cool. And then, of course, it ends up being Lori, and he's kind of talking to himself, hearing her voice and stuff like that. And I thought it was cool. I thought it was an interesting moment. I remember, I think I knew that was happening because this was, once again, having watched the show first, I think I knew that that's what was going to happen. And it's done very differently. I think in the show they made it last for a super long time. In the comic, it's like, oh, it's a little mystery, and you don't even realize that it's something else. Like, you think, like, oh, what's going to happen? And it's really fast. At least going through this, I couldn't say because obviously I don't know how long the issues actually were, so it would be hard for me to be like, yeah, that lasted like a month or something. But even then, that's a really short amount of time, because I think the show, honestly, it was like 2 or 3 months. They made that last, I felt like, for a super long time before they made that reveal. So in this, it was super quick, and I like the way it handled it. Of course, the characters start to get back together. Everybody's like, okay, we lost this person, we lost that person. Sophia starts acting crazy, and Carl knows, which I thought was funny. Michonne reveals her boyfriend because Rick ends up finding her, and so she mentions that, and then he mentions that his stuff with the phone call. So I thought that was cool. We have the trio of Abraham, Rosita, and Eugene showing up, which was definitely interesting. Maggie tried to kill herself. I completely forgot about that. So that's one of the reasons I enjoy reading this, because there are moments where I'm just like, I don't really remember, because technically I've read up to the end of Compendium 3, and there's some characters where I'm like, I know they died, and I'll remember some stuff like right before it happens. I'll read something, I'm like, oh, I now know what happens on this very next page, but little things here and there you won't think of. And Maggie trying to kill herself, not that that's a little thing, I just forgot. I was like, oh, that's interesting, because I couldn't remember if she was dead or alive. Yeah, by the end of book 3, I honestly can't remember for some of these characters, because so many people come in and out. Unfortunately, going out typically means you dead. That's really it. If you're no longer in it, you just died. That's really it. So she tried to kill herself, which was crazy. They have the moment where Abraham and Rick, they end up sharing kind of the crazy dark things that they've done just in vengeance and things like that. And it turns out Carl was awake, and he talks about the stuff that he did. And I was like, okay, they kind of bond over like the dark violence and how it's taken over them, but also they still have a bit of control of it. Like, okay, they have their cool moment. Morgan returns. Of course, he lost his son. Super sad. The hill herd, that was a crazy moment where they hit the car hits and Abraham just goes flying over. It's like, okay, forgot about this. The herd officially coming into the series, so that was cool. And I also I just remembered what happened to the boys. Oh yeah. So there we go. I guess the hill herd is not the crash. That's a different hill, a different herd, which was also still a hill because they literally go over a hill and they crash the car. So apparently that was a different hill herd. I realize that now because I think the kids were dead before that. Anyway, so I just remember what happened. So Billy gets killed by his brother. I didn't remember the specifics. I thought that for some reason they both died, and I thought I remembered, but I wasn't remembering it 100%. And then it was like, oh, he killed his brother, and then of course Carl kills him. It's like, I'm not afraid of you. Kills him in the night, and the darkness of the night. Gabriel appears. I hated Gabriel in the show. I hate Gabriel in the comics. That's just me being me. Like, he just be saying dumb stuff. Like, I don't have anything against religious people, but he's like the specific religious person that I hate. Where it's like, maybe God's plan was to have these boys, this one boy, kill his twin brother, get all sorts of fucked up. That's crazy. And then have someone else in the mystery darkness shoot this boy in the face. And then it led you all to me. Maybe that was God's plan. Like, it's amazing the stuff that he says where I'm like, how is that not some of the most like self-righteous things that you could possibly think? So hated him in the show, hated him in the comics. He's a very great character to hate. Like, the stuff he says, and it's easy to put him in a religious camp and just be like, everything he says, like all these horrible things, maybe it's God's plan. And it's always like everything. It was a very selfish way to do it. Like, even religious people, you're not supposed to be, but it is what it is. But he was super selfish about it. Like, everything was always like, this was God's plan. Like, I understand why you got me here and stuff like that. And it was always based on someone else dealing with something horrible, and he just happens to be there. Which is why he barely shows. I honestly didn't think of that. Like, it's funny reading Gabriel. I'm pretty sure he's still alive by the end of book 2, but I have not seen this dude in a minute after, by the time you get to like towards the end there, which is funny. So, Carl killed Ben. I also put Dark Carl and had this very ugly drawing because I thought it was funny. And it's just Carl, like, he's getting into that angst. I can't say teenage angst because technically he's still like 9 or something crazy. The strangers, they eat Dale's leg. That was a crazy moment. I forgot about the strangers entirely, so that was actually kind of interesting. And they were done. Like, I have other notes here. I put Rick, Abraham, and Michonne ain't nothing to fuck with. The dude was doing his whole thing was, I bet they're shit in their pants. And Rick just walked out like, not exactly. And I was like, yeah, they screwed now. I forgot how short that was, honestly. I was just like, oh yeah, like, I remember, they took Dale's leg and I won't spoil stuff for the show, but they switched things up. It's a different person in the show. So I was like, oh, okay, I forgot about that and how they did it. And they pretty much handled that situation just about instantaneously. They killed all of them. It was like, all right, we're just going to torture these people. They hacked them up and everything. And I put, and so Gabriel was shooketh because he had to just kind of stand there and watch. Dale and Rick know that he did all the right things. Dale, that was his final amazing Dale speech was like, I hated you for some of the stuff that happened, but in the end, you're the reason we lived. Granted, people died, but you're also the only reason that I'm here to die this way. You're the only reason that we lived as long as we did. The other stuff is like, you did good, you can be a leader again. So it's like, okay, giving him that confidence boost to go through. Basically, the cycle of this entire series is Rick just being like, leader, not leader, leader again, not leader, because he wants to do, like, it's the whole series, it seems. So they do that. Aaron has arrived. They made it to Alexandria. Douglas hates Davidson. Where are the guns? All that good stuff. Abraham meets Holly, and then, that's his downfall there, just being Abraham, being a douchebag. Rick pulled the gun on Douglas, which I thought was interesting, and then Rick starts to lead once again in a pretty dark way, but it gets wild. So I stopped my notes right after he's dead. So we have some stuff here. Ron beat his son. I put Ron, beat son, confronts Carl. Oh, okay. I sometimes these notes. It took me like a week to go through this one because I've been so busy. So some of these things I was writing super fast, and now I'm just like, I put a lot of comments, and I don't know what that means. I remember now when they first got to Alexandria. Carl ran into Ron's son, who was like, I want to see your gun. So he pushed him, and he's like, I'm gonna tell my dad and stuff. So the kid pushed Carl because he said no, and then Carl pushed him back. I guess he pushed him harder because the kid was like, I'm gonna tell my dad, even though I pushed you first. And I guess Carl was like, well, I'm gonna push you to the ground. Don't test me. And so they saw that. But I also put Carl said, leap, nigga, because he was ready to fight, which is funny. Rick gave, I put the dick to Jesse, which is what happened there, and then that doesn't. Things just don't last in this. Alexandria was a lot of people banging, and then those people just dying, and I feel like that's what Alexandria was. It was either people were getting into new relationships that was them cheating, or people were getting into new relationships that ended a couple of weeks later because somebody got killed somehow. So the wall breaks. Morgan is bit, so Morgan's gone. He admits to Carl that he saw him shoot Ben. I also put he's dead, and then I have drop the axe. The gun is fired. Traumatizing. So that was the end of my notes because I had to shoot through the last little bit of this, which is why this review is so insanely late. / discussion, I guess. So Morganheim was interesting. I love the scene where, that's actually what he's dead for. Where he's going through his final moments and he sees Carl, and by the end of it, he says his son's name, Dwayne. And Carl, and I put he's dead because I realized when it got to that moment that was like his catchphrase. Every time somebody would mention something, especially with Sophia, he was always effing. I'm like, he's being so mean to this girl. Like, she's already after her mom literally killed herself, and she's they had some slight hints where it was like but she's cool. But every time somebody's like this thing or whatever, he's just like, get over it, they're dead. And I'm just like, this kid is so dark Carl. And it was just funny. I was just like, he's dead is like his number one go-to line. Like, I'm not Dwayne, he's dead. And it's just like, the dude is dying. You couldn't just be like a quick second like, I'm sorry, it's not me, he's dead, get over it. Like, I'm not your son, he's dead. I'm like, Jesus, Carl. Kids are assholes. Drop the axe. That was, of course, Rick screwed up. He screwed up 100%. Everything was chaotic. It was like, look, all we have to do is we can put the zombie guts on us. We'll walk through. Everything will be fine. Don't worry. It was all bad. It was all bad. It led to a great moment in the comic, which was also one of the best episodes of the series because they pretty much followed it verbatim. But man, that was such a crazy moment. I remember reading that, and it was like, okay, they're going through. Maggie was like, I don't think so. We're going to stay in the house. Genius call. Absolutely effing genius. But Rick was like, okay, I'm not going to convince you. He goes out. It's like, it's me. It's my son. It's the woman I'm banging. And it's her son. Oh, I skipped over, obviously. I think the dude's name was Pete. He was the husband who was abusive. And he came in and was just like, he ended up being super pissed. He killed Douglas's wife. So Douglas was like, okay, Rick, blow his brains out. Killed the dude. And, so they had all that. Obviously skipped over a bunch of stuff there. But that scene where they go out and then it's like the kid, he pees himself and it's like, Rick, he's not ready for this. And he starts talking. It's like, hey, you guys got to keep it quiet. And then they swarm on the kid, and then she's freaking out and she won't let go of Carl. And then they get her. And I was just like, okay. And I remember first reading it and I was like, this sucks. Like, he bonded with this woman. It was like his plan to we can walk through, we'll get out and everything will be good. We'll pick him off from the outside. And it was just so chaotic and just went horribly wrong. And then, as she's like, please don't leave me, he's like, you or my son, you gotta go. And he just drops the axe right on her hand and just it's just hanging off. And she has to let go. And then she just gets devoured. And then here comes Douglas he was gonna kill himself. But then he's like, I can do a last little bit to help. And Rick's just screaming please stop firing the gun. And he's just banging off shots. And then, of course, he gets bit. So then he's just blind firing everywhere. Everybody's just ducking. And I'm telling you, when I first read that moment, and it was like, is everybody okay? And he turns around and it's just a full page splash. And it's just Carl. And it looks like a chunk of his brain. I should have had to say it, but I bet it's probably one of the bent pages if I shoot through here. But just that woman, basically I'm right there. It's so crazy. This right here, this is traumatizing. When I first read this, I'm sure how everybody else felt. I think I intentionally paused when I first read this just to let it sink in holy crap, I think they just killed Carl. Because it looked like, you can clearly tell now it's it's at an angle. But when you first see it, his eye is gone and it looks like it went through his brain. You can tell it was at an angle even then. But it's it seemed like that took enough out. And I remember reading that for the first time and being like, they just killed Carl. And that's crazy. And then, of course, I like, that's an ending. Like, that's the end of an issue, and they're just like, all right, see you next week. Like, that's how you end an issue right there. Like, did they just kill Carl? And to be continued. Like, that has to have been the ending to that issue. And if not, it was still great. I mean, heck, I intentionally paused just because I was like, I need to let this sink in because he might actually be dead. But of course, everything ends up being meh. And so he's passed out for pretty much the rest of this. He wakes up kind of towards the end there. But go through a couple other things. We have the slight issue with some of the older residents. I think it was Nicholas, if I'm not mistaken. He wanted to turn on Rick because it was like, Rick's crazy and they're going to get our people killed and they have us out here digging trenches and that stuff isn't safe. And so Glenn, being awesome, was just like, oh, hey, don't worry about it. And then it's like, oh, I didn't have to go down like this. And so it just chaos. Rick could have killed the dude, but he didn't. And he kind of brings him into the fold, makes him understand, like, I'm not trying to take over and rule or anything. Even though as soon as he got there, like, one of the first things he said was like, if we have to, we'll just kill him and take it. Like, he did say that. He said he does some dark stuff during the second book where I'm like, there's some moments, and he does admit it. Like, he goes through a couple of moments in this that I enjoyed where he's like, I'm not gonna lie to you. He even has that moment with Andrea where he's like, look, for a long time, I was kind of just like, it's me, it's my lady, it's my son. Everybody else can get fucked. But because I'm the leader, I guess you guys survive too. I don't actually care. It was really to protect my family. And he would say that, he said that a couple times, I felt, throughout this book. And it was like, that's really what I was doing most of the time. And then eventually as things kind of went through, specifically in that moment where him and Michonne are fighting back and then everyone else starts to come out and they just take everything out to survive. That was the moment where he's like, we can actually do something here. We can live. And that, I think that was, oddly enough, that insanely horrible moment where they actually survived was the thing that made him see the light, which is insanely interesting because up till that point, everything had been easy. They'd been attacked at one point, but everything was seemingly easier until that point happened where everything was at its most chaotic. And then out of that, it was like, holy crap. Horrible things happened. We lost quite a few people. I nearly lost my son, but we made it. Like, we were literally overrun, and then everybody came out piece by piece and was like picking off an entire swarm from the inside, and it made a big difference. And then it was like he was starting to see the light. He was seeing the sun over the horizon, and that was kind of cool. And then of course things continue on, and they introduce Jesus, and that was interesting. It's like, okay, kind of trustworthy, possibly not. Kick him right in the face, knock him unconscious, and it's just like, once again, had to have that moment where everybody's like, even Aaron had to talk to him like, hey, you kind of punched me straight in the face. I was legit. If this dude's legit, you just be, curb stomping everybody. It might turn people into what you already think they are, which I thought was a great line. Like, you could turn these people into what you assume they actually are already. So I thought that was really cool. But of course, it's like, all right, we're going to work with this dude, Jesus, who is just whooping everybody's butt because he knows martial arts. He just be destroying everybody. And that's why I really like Jesus in this. But he was destroying everybody. He even helps them. Like, he's such a cool character. He could have been untied at any moment. He could have escaped them ropes. But because it was a test, he decided, all right, I'm going to help you guys out. I'm going to fight zombies while still tied up, even though I could untie myself just to give myself a better chance. He stayed tied up because that's how good he is as a fighter. And that's why Jesus is so cool in this. So I thought that was interesting. And then, of course, he unties himself. He's like, hey, here's a little bit of trust. Boom. We meet the hilltop. And then, of course, we get reference to the big N. And unfortunately for the characters of this story, the big N is not Nintendo. It is Negan. So they reference Negan, but that, of course, is Compendium 3. And all the madness that comes with that. And then the first half, I think, of the group after Negan is also in Compendium 3. So it'll be interesting. And then by the time I'm done with that, everything's brand new after that point. I don't know. There's nothing I can read where I'm like, oh, I remember this now. Like Gregory, from the leader of the Hilltop. I remembered when that guy first came in, it was like, Negan said to send you a message. And as soon as I read that, I was like, oh, yeah. And I remember what happened on the next page, which was the dude stabbed Gregory. And then I forgot about that being the moment where Rick does the thing where he's like, what? I thought that was the scene earlier in the series where he held the gun on Douglas. But that wasn't the one. I was like, I could have sworn there was a moment where he laughs or something. Because it was kind of the same in the show. And I think I was thinking of the series where in the show, I think he does that moment inside of Alexandria, not at the Hilltop. So when he finally had that moment and like the whole crowd is just around and he's just like, what? And I was like, that's a funny moment and it's super effed up. But it's also really funny. Like, the guy was about to kill him, and like he was fighting for someone that he cared for. He, of course, also didn't know Rick. I know the story of Gregory for sure, but it was very clear, even from the little bit that they show of Gregory. As soon as he's introduced, they're like, not a lot of people respect him. Like, if they respected him that much, that dude would not have instantly come in and stabbed him. Of course, Jesus was just like, I wouldn't have even picked the guy as the leader, but people like him. Like, that is about as bad as it gets. Like, I wouldn't have picked him, but at this point, it's kind of too late, and people already like him. And I'm just like, man, Rick just be coming in, and people just be on the brink of chaos, and Rick's like, don't worry, at some point, you'll be dead anyway, and I'll take over. It's no big deal. I'm Rick Grimes, and that's pretty much the whole series. Not a leader, because the last leader either just gave up in Douglas's case, or somebody dies, or however it goes in all the different scenarios. It's just interesting. It's fun to think about that. Where I'm like, well, when you really go through it all at the same time, it's like he just goes through a cycle of like, I don't want to do this. I do want to do this. I don't want to do this because, lose more and more people. I do want to do this. It's getting better. We're getting more people. It's always that army thing. Hubris, it waxes and wanes for this dude. For all of them, really. Like, they all have their moments, but I really enjoyed it. I think Compendium 2 is really fun. It's hard to say if I like this one more than the first one. I think I would say if I had to choose between Compendium 1 and 2, I would go Compendium 1. Just as far, for one, it's the beginning of the series, but as far as, like, the excitement of the series, I think Compendium 1 kind of outweighs Compendium 2, mostly because you go through so much. Like, you lose most of the characters by the end of Compendium 1, especially the prison stuff is, at this point, the prison is the darkest moment. And I think in this, the only person that dies is Morgan. I'll be honest, the twin, I think I mentioned this in my last review, the twins, the boys, they're in it so little that there were literally moments where I was like, are they still in the series? Because they literally like did not draw them because they had no relevance to the story. They would just show up in group shots. So they barely count. And that's so crappy to say, but they barely count. Dell is important. So Dell and Morgan, I think, are the two people we lose. But compared to like the ending of Compendium 1 and just that being the beginning of the series, how that series starts and the people that they gain and then lose by the end of that, it's insane what happens by the end of the prison. So I'd say that still has the excitement. This is definitely that middle of the, this is the second movie in the trilogy type of situation. And obviously I haven't read 4, but I know that kind of goes off into something else by the end of 3, but this is definitely like that classic book 2. They have some crazy stuff in here. They do kill quite a few people, but they're not like the most important people. They're newer people, and it's definitely exciting to see how it's going to end up playing out, because it's like, okay, the intensity does keep ramping up in different ways, but they spend a lot of time in Alexandria and everything is much more peaceful and calm by the time they get there. And then it's like, the end of this is super hopeful. Like I said, the end of book 1 is literally like, okay, so everyone's dead. Your mom was shot in the back, and your sister, she was in her arms and she's dead. So it's just you and me, son. That's the end. They killed like 8 people or something wild. Like, they kill so many people by the end of the prison. It's just like, this is devastating. And then this one ends. It's like, there's hope on the horizon. I don't know what Negan is, but that's just a name. So we'll get to that in book 3. But for now, Compendium 2, highly recommend you guys pick it up. We'll love to know your thoughts on Compendium 2. And of course, getting to the hilltop, that's basically where things end. It's, hope on the horizon and all that good stuff. We'll love to know your thoughts on Compendium 2. And of course, going forward, which will be next weekend for Compendium 3, there's a couple moments. There was one that I was waiting for very specifically, which, if for whatever reason you're following along with this and you have not read Compendium 3, I will not spoil it, but there's one character that I thought for sure died in this because there were some references, and I think the very mission that they referenced, that they don't go on yet, I think is what happens where a character unfortunately dies. And it was just one of those moments where it was just like, dang. It was just an out of nowhere, and I'm kind of just waiting for that in the 3rd book. I forgot it was in the 3rd book because I was expecting it for this one, but that is unfortunately book 3 and the start of just the absolute kind of Compendium 1 chaos. It gets to that point. Like, Negan is definitely Prison Part 2, where it's the governor, but worse. It's crazy. It's so crazy. But I'm excited to read it again and go through all of that madness. I can't remember how many people die, but I feel like a lot of people die in book 3. I know they do by the end of it, especially because book 3 is all of the Negan stuff, and then after as well, just for avoiding really weird old spoilers that I'm sure people already know about, especially if you've seen the show as well or whatever. But really enjoyed it. like I said, looking forward to rereading book 3 and, of course, getting to book 4. If you guys have any comments, please put them down in the comment section below. By next week, by the way, I will have other comic reviews. With these being so big, and of course this week was just unfortunately busy, I did not get to read through any of my other books, and I still wish, I was like, I should have just started with Scott Pilgrim. I would have finished that whole series by now. The amount of time it took to read all 6 of those probably would have been the same reading just one of these things, because they're so freaking ridiculous. But I'll begin through Compendium 3, and I will at least have like 1 or 2 reviews up for Scott Pilgrim by next weekend as well. So thanks for checking this out. Of course, if you guys have any comments, please put them down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.